The morning he realized I was gone, he called 7 times before noon. I know because my phone logged every single one. I didn't pick up, not because I was angry. Anger had left me months ago, quietly, like a tenant who stops paying rent and eventually just disappears. I didn't pick up because there was nothing left to say. Everything I needed to say, I had already said. Not with words. With a wire transfer, a moving truck, and a very good attorney named Patricia who returned emails within the hour. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to a Tuesday in October. The kind of Tuesday that should have been unremarkable, cool air coming through the kitchen window, the smell of the pasta I'd made from scratch because I'd had a slow afternoon, the low hum of the dishwasher running its cycle. I remember thinking the house felt almost peaceful for once. I was wiping down the counter when I heard his car in the driveway. My husband and I had been married for 6 years. We met when I was 26 and newly relocated to Denver for a job at a mid-size architecture firm. He was 32, confident, funny in that dry way that takes a moment to land. On our third date, he took me to a bookstore and spent 40 minutes explaining why he thought a particular novel was overrated, and I thought, this is a man who has opinions about things. At 26, that felt like a quality. I quit the architecture firm after we got married. His idea, mostly, but I agreed. We were talking about starting a family, and he traveled often for work, and someone needed to be available and flexible, and he made enough that it made practical sense. I told myself it was temporary. 6 years later, I had done some freelance drafting work here and there, but nothing steady, nothing that would have sustained me on its own. That's important. Remember that part. He came in through the garage door and didn't say hello. That wasn't unusual. He traveled for work 4, sometimes 5 days a week, and when he came home, he was often quiet and distant in a way I'd learned not to take personally. Or I'd tried to learn. I handed him a glass of water and asked if he was hungry. He set the glass down without drinking. I need to tell you something, he said. I turned back to the stove. He said her name. She worked in his Dallas office. He'd mentioned her once or twice in passing over the past year. I hadn't thought anything of it. Why would I? I trusted him. 6 years of marriage, I had never had a single serious reason not to trust him. It's been going on for about 4 months, he said. He had his arms crossed, leaning against the counter, and there was something in his posture that I can only describe as prepared. Like he had rehearsed this. Like he had decided in advance how this conversation was going to go. I didn't say anything. I'm not ending it, he said. 3 words. 4, technically. But those were the ones that landed. I'm not ending it. I set down the wooden spoon I was holding. Very carefully. I placed it on the ceramic rest beside the burner, the one I'd bought at a farmer's market in Boulder the summer before, hand-painted with small blue flowers. And then I turned around and looked at my husband, this man I had shared a bed with for 6 years, and I felt something clarify inside me like water going still. Okay, I said. He blinked. That's it? Okay? I heard you. He seemed frustrated by that. He started talking about how he hoped I could be mature about this, how things hadn't been good between us for a long time, which was true, though I noticed he never once asked why, never considered whether the silence that had grown between us was something he contributed to, and how he wasn't asking for a divorce, how he just needed me to understand that he needed space to figure things out and that he expected we could come to an arrangement. An arrangement. I nodded. I served myself a plate of pasta, because I had made it and I was hungry. He stared at me like I had done something incomprehensible. Later, I would understand that my reaction had confused him. He had expected tears, or screaming, or begging. He had expected tears or screaming or begging. He had, I think, expected me to fight for him, and because I didn't, he assumed he'd won something. He went to bed at 10. I waited until his breathing evened out and then I got up. I want to be clear. I had not planned this in advance, but there are moments in life when everything you've been ignoring forces itself to the surface at once, and your body just starts moving, and your brain, which has been quietly keeping track this whole time, switches over to something cold and precise. I didn't feel angry. I felt clear. That's the only way I can describe it. clear in a way I hadn't felt in years. I went to my home office, which he never entered, and I opened my laptop. Here is something my husband did not know about me: I am very good with numbers. Before we married, before I left the architecture firm, I had managed the budgeting for 3 commercial projects simultaneously. I understood contracts, I understood asset documentation, and in the 6 years I had spent running this household, managing grocery budgets, coordinating contractors, tracking home maintenance costs, I had kept meticulous records of everything: every receipt, every invoice, every contribution. The house was purchased 4 years into our marriage. My grandmother had left me $47,000 when she passed. I put every dollar of it into the down payment. I had documentation of that transfer. I had the original wire records from my personal savings account, the account I had kept separate, because my grandmother's money felt like something that belonged specifically to me, specifically to her memory. I had the deed. I had the mortgage statements that showed my name. What my husband had forgotten, or perhaps had never taken seriously, was that my name was on everything. He had been happy to let me handle the administrative side of our life: papers, accounts, filings. He found it tedious. I found it clarifying. Over the next 3 hours, I did not move a single piece of furniture. I did not pack a single box. I did not do anything that made noise. I called my best friend. We'd known each other since college, the kind of friendship where you can call at 1 in the morning and she picks up and doesn't ask for an explanation first. She was quiet while I told her. Then she said, very calmly, "Do you want to stay here for a while?" I said yes. She said she'd make up the guest room. I emailed Patricia. I had found her 6 weeks earlier, actually. Not because I had suspected anything specific, but because I'd started feeling something I couldn't name: a restlessness, a low-level alarm, and I'd begun reading, the way I do when something feels wrong and I can't identify it. I'd read about financial planning in marriage. I'd read about asset protection. I had emailed Patricia just to ask a few questions. She was a family law attorney in Denver with very good reviews and a no-nonsense website. I had not made any decisions then. I was just gathering information. That night, I sent her a more specific email. Then I opened our joint bank account. I was the one who managed it, had always managed it, and I transferred my half of the balance into the individual account I had maintained throughout our marriage, a habit I'd kept up without knowing why. We had never discussed me closing it. It simply hadn't come up. I packed one bag: personal items, my laptop, the jewelry my grandmother had left me, the hard drive with my freelance project files, a photograph of my parents from their 25th anniversary, a book I'd been reading. At 4 a.m., I put the bag in my car. I left a note on the kitchen counter. It said, "I heard everything you said last night. I want you to know I believe you." That was all. I drove to my best friend's apartment. She had the guest room ready as promised, and a cup of chamomile tea waiting on the nightstand. I sat on the edge of the bed, and she sat across from me, and I told her everything. Not dramatically, just straightforwardly, the way you tell a story when you've already decided how it ends. She held my hand at one point. I was grateful for that. I slept better than I had in a year. The next morning, Patricia called. She was exactly as direct as her website suggested. She asked clear questions, I gave clear answers, and by the end of the call, she had outlined what I could reasonably expect and what my first steps should be. Colorado is an equitable distribution state, which means marital assets are divided fairly, not necessarily equally, based on contribution. My documentation of the down payment mattered. My 6 years of household management mattered in ways I had not expected it to. Patricia explained this without sentimentality, which I appreciated. She also made clear, gently but plainly, that my husband's name was on the mortgage, that while the down payment was documentably mine, the house itself was a marital asset. I would not simply be able to walk away with it without negotiation. But, she said, "You're in a stronger position than you might think." I thanked her and hung up and sat with that for a moment. My husband called 11 times that first day. On the 12th, I picked up. "Where are you?" he said. His voice was strange. "Tight. I'm safe," I said. You left. You told me you weren't ending the affair," I said. I believed you, so I adjusted accordingly. "Silence. We need to talk about this," he said. "You can't just disappear." "I'm not disappearing, I'm making decisions." There's a difference. He started to say something about how I was being irrational, how I'd left without a conversation, how this was not the way adults handle things. And I found myself thinking calmly that this man had stood in our kitchen and told me he was sleeping with someone else and had no intention of stopping. And he was now lecturing me about how adults handle things. I've retained an attorney, I said. You'll be hearing from her office. I'd suggest you do the same. I hung up. There is something I want to say here because I think it gets missed in these kinds of stories. I was not okay. I want to be clear about that. Underneath the clarity, underneath the precision and the documentation and the calm phone calls, I was genuinely devastated. 6 years. I had rearranged my life around this marriage. I had made choices, some of them choices I can't get back, based on the assumption that my husband was who I thought he was. That kind of loss doesn't evaporate just because you handle it well. I cried for the first time 4 days after I left. I was in the shower at my best friend's apartment and something just gave way, and I sat down on the floor of the tub and cried for a long time. She knocked on the door after a while and asked if I was okay. I said I would be. I meant it, even though it didn't feel true yet. The divorce took 8 months. My husband hired an attorney of his own, eventually, a man who seemed genuinely surprised by how organized my documentation was. There were negotiations. There were a few moments that were difficult. One phone call in particular, about the house, that I don't fully want to revisit. He did not make things easy. I had not expected him to. But here is how it resolved. He bought me out of the house. The settlement factored in my down payment contribution, the years of household management, the professional income I had deferred. Patricia had argued the last point firmly, and the numbers were not small. He kept the house. He paid me a lump sum. The mortgage was refinanced in his name alone. His girlfriend moved in 2 months after the divorce was finalized. I know because someone told me. I felt less than I expected to feel about it. I moved to a small city in Colorado, about 90 minutes from Denver, not running, just choosing. A place I'd always loved and never let myself prioritize. I put a portion of the settlement into a down payment on a house that is entirely mine, in a neighborhood with old trees and a coffee shop I can walk to. I went back to architecture, not at a firm this time. On my own. I specialize in residential renovation work and I have more clients than I can handle, and I set my own hours and nobody manages my schedule but me. I'm not going to tell you I came out of this without damage. I'm still working on some of it, but I'm also not going to pretend that what I feel, most mornings, isn't something close to relief. There's a particular quality to the silence in my house now. I noticed it the first week. It took me a while to understand what was different about it. And then I realized, it's simply quiet. It doesn't mean anything, it's not weighted. Nobody is withholding something. Nobody is waiting for an apology. Nobody is controlling anything by saying nothing. It's just a house that is quiet in the morning because it's morning, and there's coffee, and there's work I actually love waiting for me. And outside the window, the old cottonwood tree drops seeds into the yard like it does every spring, indifferent and steady and entirely unbothered by the opinions of anyone. My grandmother would have liked this house. She was a practical woman who did not believe in waiting for someone else's permission to make a decision. She left me money she had spent a lifetime saving, dollar by dollar, because she believed I would know what to do with it. I think I finally did. There is one more thing. About 3 months after the settlement, I ran into my husband's colleague, a man we'd had to dinner several times over the years, someone I'd always liked. We got coffee. Somewhere in the conversation, he said, without meaning to be unkind, that my husband had been telling people I had left out of nowhere, without warning, that he hadn't seen it coming. I thought about that for a long time on the drive home. He wasn't wrong exactly. I don't think he'd seen it coming, but I also think there's a particular kind of man who mistakes a woman's composure for permission, who looks at someone who doesn't yell, doesn't beg, doesn't perform her pain for an audience, and concludes that she must not feel very much, who interprets calm as acceptance and silence as surrender, and a woman who handles things quietly as a woman who can be handled. That kind of man is often very surprised. He called again the week of the holidays. I didn't pick up. There wasn't any point. The version of that conversation he wanted to have. The one where I was still reachable, still invested in what he thought of me, still arranged around the shape of what we used to be. That version didn't exist anymore. I sent the call to voicemail and went back to the drawings open on my desk. A kitchen renovation for a couple in Fort Collins. Clean lines, good light, a window over the sink that would catch the afternoon sun. I had very specific ideas about the window, and I wanted to get the specs right before I lost the thought. Outside, the cottonwood was doing its thing again. I got back to work. I've thought a lot about why I didn't scream that night. People ask me sometimes. Not directly, but in the way people circle around a question they think might be uncomfortable. Whether I was in shock, whether I was numb, whether something in me had just shut down and I was operating on autopilot while the real grief waited somewhere behind a closed door. And I understand why they ask it that way, because the version of this story that makes sense to most people is the one where a woman falls apart when her world does, where the pain is loud and immediate and visible, where she fights, or begs, or at the very least, cries at the kitchen counter before she does anything else. I didn't do any of that. And for a long time, I wondered if that meant something was wrong with me. What I've come to understand is this. I had been preparing for that moment for longer than I realized. Not consciously, not because I suspected him specifically, but because somewhere in the back of my mind, some quiet and practical part of me had been paying attention to the distance between us, to the way I had slowly stopped counting on him for things that mattered, to the way I had kept my grandmother's money separate without ever fully examining why. The body knows things before the mind catches up. And sometimes what looks like calm from the outside is just someone who has already done a kind of grief they couldn't name yet. That night, when he stood in our kitchen and told me he wasn't ending it, I think he expected the announcement to give him power, to put him in control of what happened next. And I think he genuinely believed, based on 6 years of watching me manage our life quietly and without complaint, that quiet meant passive, that someone who didn't yell was someone who wouldn't act. He was wrong about that, and it cost him considerably. Here is what I know now that I didn't know at 26. The most important decisions you will ever make will not feel dramatic when you make them. They will feel small and clear and almost boring. Transferring money, sending an email, packing one bag, that's it. That's the whole thing. The drama comes later, in other people's reactions, but the decision itself is quiet. It happens in the middle of the night at a laptop in a home office that someone else never bothered to enter. I also know this. The documentation mattered. The records I kept, the account I maintained, the receipts I filed away for reasons I couldn't fully articulate at the time. All of it mattered enormously when it came time to build a case for my own future. There is nothing romantic about a spreadsheet, but there is something deeply clarifying about a woman who knows exactly what she contributed and can prove it. My grandmother was not a woman who waited for the world to be fair to her. She made herself fair to herself, dollar by dollar, year by year, until she had enough to leave something behind. I spent a long time thinking her money was the gift. I think now the real gift was the example. What happened to my husband after the divorce is not something I spend much time thinking about. What happened to me is a house with old trees, work I'm proud of, mornings that belong entirely to me. That's not nothing, that's everything.